It is my honor also to be with the gentlemen here, and I am very appreciative that you took your time and you were ready to come and participate in this conversation. And I just want to ask a few questions, and then you will have hopefully also some time to reflect at the tables, and then maybe a few tables can raise one question which could be answered by one or all of them. But I would like to start with the personal one. How did you all become a priest and even a bishop? And Tauri, I know you are the theologian. So my question to you, Tauri, is how did you become a theologian? Maybe not the whole story of life, but something about your journey.
Yes, the priesthood of all believers, right? So I'm a theologian representing this part, probably in this gathering. But I think for me, the question or the ingredients of becoming a theologian was an easy one. I was, as a child, already in the Orthodox Church. This was my environment. Actually not very very popular in Estonia, because a lot of Orthodox are converted Orthodox. So to have from already, and at least from the Estonian side, so to grow up in the Orthodox Church is in general a rarity. So from this aspect, I think I got my background, and in school I liked history a lot. So that's why I think I wanted to know more about also my faith background. And this opened up a whole new horizon to the church fathers, to the historical elements of Christian theology. And voila, that's how a theologian was born.
I have completely different background. I grew up in non-Christian family, and I was baptized when I was 70 years old. And that was 1989, the time of national and also partly spiritual awakening in Estonia, and many people came to the churches, got baptized, confirmated. I started to study theology, and first of all, my love, I fall in love with theology. That was just so interesting, so inspiring for me that during these studies, somehow I started to feel God's call towards ministry. Quite a number of years I didn't follow this call because I felt that to be priest, it is so demanding. It is so, the shoes are so big that I wouldn't fit into them. But when there was a moment to make a decision, I remember an argumentation in my head which was running like this. I felt that I had got from the Lutheran Church so much spiritual, theological wisdom, so many friends, companions, that I need to give something back. And if God wants to use me in ministry, I would be ready.
Well, and I'm born in a Catholic family, but personally, at the beginning, I never really thought to become a priest. I became an engineer, civil engineer. So it was my first love, I would say. I worked in highways, building highways, things like that. And after that, during some years, little by little, I felt that even if what I was doing or studying before, I liked it, and I like it still, but I felt that the Lord was waiting something else from me, and so after some years, I just began to study for becoming a priest, and then a bishop, and then, well, actually in 2 days I will, it's also the reason why, unfortunately, I cannot stay very much with you. In 2 days I will be installed, as we say in the Catholic Church, as the bishop of the Catholic diocese, the newly created Catholic diocese of Tallinn. So, well, for me, it's not exactly like a wedding for me, but I'm in the same situation as a young man or a man, just let's say, waiting to be married on Sunday with guests and so on. So, but in 2 days I will have I will get a little bit expanded personal experience of priesthood. But well, anyway, I will explain it to Meego after that. At the moment, it's too early.
Congratulations to you also. We really respect you, Philippe, and I remember when you were consecrated to be a bishop, and it was in St. Olaf's Church. Some of you visited just today. And I remember when you were standing at the street and everybody wanted to give you a hand and wish you well, and you just said humbly, "Please pray for me." And it was really touching my heart.
If I can say something else, I know other Catholic bishops who have been ordained or consecrated a bishop in Lutheran churches, but I am the only one I know who was consecrated in a Baptist church, let's say.
So maybe we feel a kind of common spirit here. Yeah. Now, during that conference, we are really after the question, what is priesthood after all? And after all means 2,000 years. And you all represent a long-lasting tradition. And my first question would be right now, how is a role of priest in your denomination, if I can say that, defined, and how it has evolved during the centuries?
So I'm supposed to begin. Thank you. Well, we try to, in some words, to summarize, because about the priesthood, of course, there are thousands of books written, but in the Catholic Church, well, the first idea is that any kind of priesthood comes from Christ, who is the high priest. So, common priesthood, or let's say the priesthood of people who are called priests, are a certain participation in the priesthood of Christ. That's the first point. There is no Christ as high priest and then others who are priests. Our priesthood comes only from the priesthood of Christ, who is the only mediator between man and God. And then the other things is, as you perhaps know, the Catholic Church distinguished as two kind of participations in this priesthood of Christ. First of all, what we call in the Catholic Church the common priesthood. It would be perhaps like the priesthood of all believers. The common priesthood, which comes from baptism, and which is a real participation in the priesthood of Christ, and the ministerial, as we call, priesthood, which comes through the what is for us a sacrament of priesthood, and from which comes priests and bishops and also the Pope. Even if Pope is not a special kind of priesthood. So the common priesthood is like, let's say, the ordinary communion in the grace of God, and the ministerial priesthood is more like a charisma, special grace given to some of the members of the community for the service of the common priesthood.
Yes, if I try to put it simply, the priesthood of all believers for us as Lutherans means that every Christian in baptism is called to be priest for his or her fellow believers, to pray for them to take care of his or her soul, to offer them pastoral care. But special priesthood is connected mostly and mainly with administering God's gospel and sacraments. According to the Lutheran way of thinking, and it says clearly in the Augsburg Confession, which is one of our basic confessional writings, it says that nobody can preach the word of God and administer sacraments without being properly called by the church or the congregation. And this properly calling, or rite vocatus in Latin, basically means ordination. So one is ordained for priesthood to preach the gospel and administer the sacraments. That's the basic distinction without ordained and non-ordained priests. And perhaps what is very characteristic of Lutheranism is that we understand proclaiming the gospel, not just reading it from the book, but it is more or less interpretation. And therefore it is for us very important that priests have to be theologians. They have to have a valid or good or solid theological education. In my church, as in many Lutheran churches, there is a requirement for the priests to have a higher theological education. Nowadays it's master's degree before other requirements are met to get ordained, and therefore we put a lot of stress into the formation and theological education of ministers. So one could also say that one of the differences is that the priest is also an expert of God's word. He or she may not be academic theologian in a sense of publishing articles every year, but he or she should be or have at least sufficient expertise and knowledge in theology. And of course there are lay theologians as well, but that's one of the qualifications, the theological education, which belongs according to our understanding together with ordination.
I think in the Orthodox Church, well, if you asked about the development, that's a long story, right? 2,000 years of development as we see it. But I think the main elements were already established in the New Testament, 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, etc. What in the Orthodox Church means to be a priest is to bring a sacrifice in whichever level and in whichever form you see that. The so-called Hieratev Ma'aion, which is the priesthood, the holy priesthood of all believers, is understood by the Orthodox Church to also bring the sacrifice, as Apostle Paul speaks in his epistle to Romans, is to bring ourselves, our being, to God as a sacrifice, our hearts. Later on, this was also interpreted in the church as bringing our prayers. And actually, this is the only sacrifice that a human being, a created being, can do. And this is the only sacrifice that we, as Orthodox Christians, think we can do. And this is valid to a very simple layman, from a layman to an archpriest or a bishop or a patriarch. But then the question is, what about the specific priests that we have, called the bishops? What's their role? Well, their role in the Orthodox Church is also not to bring a sacrifice, but to refer to a sacrifice. A one-of-a-kind sacrifice that no human has ever brought. The sacrifice that only Christ himself has brought. And none of us actually, we can only receive this sacrifice. We cannot do this sacrifice. And we can only refer to this sacrifice. So what a priest, bishop, priest, deacon, in generally the clergy do, and what is their role as a specific charisma of priests, is not even theirs. They just refer to the priesthood of Christ. And that's their job. They're like iconic figures who just refer to, and nothing more. So, and that's why when in the Orthodox liturgy we say that when the priest or bishop, mainly when a bishop is dressed with vestments, some have said, you got very fancy clothes in the Orthodox Church. But actually what's going on there is actually, and the songs and the prayers we do, we essentially, what we do with the bishop, we say your person is not any more important. You put on Christ, an icon of Christ. And the work and the priesthood that he represents there is the priesthood of Christ, because the sacrifice of Christ that he did in history once is participated, it's participable by the church members, and it is valid till nowadays. In every liturgy, in every communion, we come together, and essentially the priest just refers to it. We have like mobile icons moving of Christ moving in there and referring to him, because for the Orthodox the liturgy is done by Christ himself through the Holy Spirit. So we just refer to what he's doing because we need some sensible figures to understand what is going on. And essentially, I think the concept that the bishop or proistamenos or presbyter, the elder of the parish, already very early in Christianity, because he was the symbol of the Eucharistic gathering. He gathered them together, and this is also a New Testament reality also. And everybody kind of, early understood that, wait, who was the first one who gathered us? Well, it was Christ, Jesus Christ in his Last Supper. So essentially, the idea that the bishop became like an icon, a symbol of what Christ did, is a very early tradition. And I think these two elements of sacrifice, of priesthood, have coexisted in the Orthodox Church. So first, from the people, including the bishops who as human beings bring their lives as sacrifice, and the other, the reference to Christ's sacrifice.
It's great stuff. But we move on, and maybe we want to come back to some of these questions later, but my question now would be about authority, because priests somehow practice some kind of authority. Where do they get it, and how do they use it, especially toward a laity, but also the church as a whole? So maybe all of you can respond from your tradition.
Well, in the Catholic tradition or Catholic theology, what is supposed to be the mission of the goal of the ministerial priesthood, that means the specific priesthood of priests and bishops. It's the three so-called, in Latin, munera, or let's say tasks, I would say in English. The munus docendi, sanctificandi, regendi. It means the task of teaching, the task of governing, what especially, not everything, of course, but what is directly related with the church life, and the task of sanctifying, especially through the let's say the sacrament. So this is the exact participation in the priesthood of Jesus Christ. And inside of the munus regendi, to say the task of governing, there is this specific authority of the hierarchy of the church, which is not an authority for anything, for all kinds of temporal things, but it's a specific authority what is directly directed to the soul and to holiness of the people. And so it's not that a priest has the right to give orders or to say for whom we should vote in the next election, something like that. But he has a specific charge to provide to each person a way to go to holiness. And among other things, there is not only, let's say, the factors of preaching, but the fact also of being a spiritual father, which is not only a task of the priests. In the Catholic tradition, there are many lay people who were also great spiritual fathers. But it's a special way of helping people on the individual point of view to make steps toward God and toward the holiness. So perhaps the spiritual, let's say, fatherhood could be a good way also to understand what is the authority, well, according to the tradition, the Catholic tradition. Thank you.
Yes, recalling what I've said earlier, then of course there are different levels of authority, and the first most important and theological authority which is given to priests is the authority to preach the gospel and to administer sacraments, which are baptism, Holy Communion, and repentance in our tradition. And that's the authority which is given to all priests by the Church, but ultimately, of course, this authority goes back to Christ, who has given this authority to apostles, and which has been given or handed over during the centuries. I think here we Lutherans think quite similarly with our Orthodox and Catholic brothers and sisters. And that's the basic theological authority which is given by ordination. Now, of course, there are other levels of authorities, a spiritual, pastoral authority, and this depends very much from person to person, and also from community to community. There are priests who are better father confessors or spiritual leaders, directors. If people come to you because we don't have any obligatory private confession, the last person who came to me to confess was a Catholic. She didn't make a problem of that. I did neither. But it happens quite seldom among Lutheran people. But here we have a variety, which is in our country, in the Estonian Lutheran Church, a level of authority is an administrative one. That depends and also differs from country to country. For example, in Germany, in Lutheran churches, the church board or board of elders is much more important. And pastor, as far as I know, is just one member of the board, and lay leaders might in many cases be more important than the pastor. In my country, Lutheran pastor has quite a lot of administrative authority as well. He or she is quite often like chief officer of a small company, which is a congregation. But this is not a theological authority, but that might differ from places to places and churches to churches, and has more to do with a given context and how the church operates.
Yeah, as a third here, I think I may confirm many of that has been said, but I would maybe just generalize all this, that the authority of the clergy, from a historical point of view, has been to guard the apostolic proclamation. This has been their main role. This is called the kerygma, the kerygmatic role. Of course, also the catechetic element, the teaching, what the apostles gave, the gospel, all these elements, the Eucharistic gathering. So all these roles started from there. And I would call, and of course also guiding and leading the parish, the church, etc. And this authority exists, but this does never exist, or it never exists alone. So there has to be a synodality, a communal element, which means that no bishop, no clergy can do anything alone. We have the role of the laity, controlling them, the other bishops controlling them, etc. So when we all come together, and especially the clergy, which means that all the bishops come together, then only can we talk about some sort of authority per se. Because, of course, each and every bishop has an authority in his, let's say, bishopric, and every priest in his parish, but all these are only when they truly are in line with the apostolic proclamation. If not, then the authority ends there. So they represent something. But in addition to apostolic proclamation and guarding and safeguarding this, as every bishop has to make a vow that I have to keep all that has been given from the apostles and change nothing here or deviate from that. But the second element is the charismatic element, which is the element where we come into direct communion and contact with God. This is very direct contact. And this is another matter, and this is something that when we talk about the priesthood of all believers, this is what it means, that we don't need any intermediate levels here. We can have direct contact. We're members of the same kingdom. And here, this is an element where actually the lay people start checking the clergy in the Orthodox Church. I would call it the Orthodox coalition and opposition, if we want. The bishops are the coalition, but in order for a coalition to work, you need to have a good opposition also. Not a weak one, not a too strong one, because otherwise the coalition can't work either. So you need a balance, and the Orthodox opposition is laity. Laity is not only members of the parish, but we're talking about mystics, monks, ascetics, etc., who are all actually, it's a lay movement, a very powerful lay movement that has moved mountains, patriarchs and bishops from their places in the Orthodox Church. And this very strong opposition is based on a charismatic experience of God. And they may go to a bishop and say, okay, you protect the apostolic proclamation, but what is your experience of God? Do you have any? Or you just guard it. So this charismatic element now can come and say that I am actually more true Christian than you are, because you're maybe just in office here. So this balancing element, I think, is very important, and historically has been very important, where I see the laity and clergy have a very good balance, opposition, coalition, stability to be held. So I think that many times when the bishops have forgotten that, yes, we are in this world, but not from this world, then the ascetics and lay people have come in and reminded them that the kingdom of heaven is still coming and we're still moving towards it. We have not arrived there yet. And the earthly kingdom does not represent it finally. And I think here the laity role is the burning heart of Orthodox Christianity, and they keep us on the right track. And I think this is the priesthood of all believers. Interesting again.
Now, I didn't want to ask any trick questions, but still, with a sincere interest, Bishop Philippe, how does Roman Church interpret Apostle Paul, who says that the bishop, episkopon, needs to be husband of one wife?
Yeah, it could seem to be a strange question, but many years ago when I came to Estonia, once I had to go to the tax office, not far from here in the Endla Street, and so I was waiting, and before me came a man that I knew, and so we began to speak, and he said to me at one moment, "Well, but where is your wife?" Because it was tax office, or perhaps, and the guy was Catholic himself, not an old Catholic certainly. And so he thought a little bit, and he said, yes, the Catholic priests don't marry." Excuse me. So yeah, it's not the first time that this question is given to me. Now we say first of all that it's as such it's not very surprising that speaking about the bishop being husband of one wife, first of all it would be necessary to see also if what is called in Timothy the bishop is exactly what later would be like formalized, let's say, as just the level of bishop ordination. And then one thing is celibacy as a way of life, which is especially in the Western Church, in the Latin Church, a very old tradition, because it's already very well documented, at least since the beginning of the 4th century. And another thing is the celibacy as, let's say, a situation of life. That to say, the fact of ordaining only non-married people. So it's from the 11th century. So as such, the fact that in the first centuries, it would be there would be married people who became bishops. It's obvious, but the thing I think is, which is interesting, is also to think about whom St. Paul is speaking, because of course one interpretation would be to say, well, he's just giving like moral recommendations, which would be the same he would give to any other people. It seems a little bit strange, let's say, because in fact not only the bishops have to be the husband of one wife, but every married man should be the husband of one wife. So it means that St. Paul is speaking about people who at some moment were, we could say perhaps public sinners, but who are not anymore, because obviously otherwise they would not be proposed to be bishops, we can understand. And so people who have been or with two wives or with or married two times. Of course, I don't speak about widowers, because in that case it would not be a moral recommendation, just a kind of disciplinary recommendation. So in that case, it means that they are people who have been moral sinners, let's say, or have had such a past. But at the moment when they could be bishops, they are not living in that situation. So probably they are already separated from their second illegitimate wife. So perhaps because just this union finished like that, perhaps because of a kind, let's say, of celibacy, let's say, chosen by the person or just imposed by life. But it's also a reason why some authors even interpret this sentence as like a reference to some kind of celibacy, which in the first centuries of the church certainly would not have been a law, a rule for the church, but which was already, let's say, extended among priests and among bishops. So just to say that as such, it's not at all surprising to speak about the let's say the wife of the bishop, because it's only after much later than at least in the Catholic Church that people ordained were mainly living in celibacy, even if there were always exceptions. What we have to understand about the topic is that it's a rule which is going on. It doesn't mean that there were no exceptions, so it's not as such, let's say, a moral rule, because there are people who have been married, who are separated also of their wife or not, and who can become Catholic priests with sometimes with special permission of the Holy Father. So it's a complex question as such, the celibacy in the Catholic Church. But in that case, I think it's well, it's not surprising, because at the beginning, of course, people were mainly, they were adults when they came to the faith, so mainly they were married. The Catholic Church considered that many of them who became priests and bishops decided to live, let's say, a non-marital life. That's the beginning of. For that reason, the Catholic Church considered that it's a very old tradition since the first centuries, and it's what we can say about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tauri, why can Orthodox people can be priests and theologians while married, but bishops cannot?
Yeah, well, referring to your previous reference to Apostle Paul, yes, the early bishops, and we know also of church fathers who were married with families, and especially in the East, I think, in the eastern parts of the Roman Empire and Eastern Christianity, except the Syriac tradition, where it was even understood that being married is a non-Christian concept. So they said to become a Christian, you should never become married. So very extreme concepts from the Syriac tradition. But in the Greek East, they were more open to it. And we know that, yes, all were married. But we see already that from the ascetic movement, 3rd, 4th century, we see this tradition coming in that... mainly based on what Christ said, that in heaven, in paradise, we do not take wives or take husbands or wives. So the eschatological future perspective, where these things are not anymore important, that they are important in this world, made many who wanted to really dedicate themselves to the church, to the eschatological future reality, to already live it through in such a way that they said, okay, we can, live in accordance with these realities. We're so close to it that we can even abandon these concepts without, of course, any pejorative feelings to those who do get married. And that's why I think slowly, especially the bishops, it naturally became like that I suppose already in the 6th, 5th century, anyhow, normally, without anyone saying anything, there were I say celibacy bishops, and it was allowed to marry, but naturally it evolved like that. And this then is put to an end at the end of the 7th century. So in the Orthodox Church, bishops, or in the Eastern Church, bishops stopped getting married after the 7th century. So for the first 600 years, the bishops got married, and the reasons for that was earthly matters. Actually, of course, dedication, consecrating your life, having the church as your own family, understandable. This was also there. But why it was then forbidden at one moment for bishops to get married was corruption, economic questions, parish life, property, simonia, etc. All these elements that the church at one moment understood that the bishops, because the power grew, their parishes, bishoprics went bigger, a lot of more property came in, and because of that, if you had a temptation of your own family plus the family of your church, you started making choices, giving some to your son, etc., some buildings here or there, or maybe your son became the next bishop, etc. So, it became like a monarchy in this sense. So to evade all these things and to keep the purity and unity and take the scandals out from the church, it was, yes, forbidden by canon law in 691-92, the Quinisext Council does that, but they already say that we now forbade, but still in North Africa, in Egypt, the bishops still continued marrying. So we know that it took some time, and then, of course, after iconoclasm, 8th, 9th century, from the 10th century onwards, also the monastic lay movement in a way occupied the bishop siege places and thrones, and then the bishops already were so much linked to the monastic movement that they already grew out from there. So it's from celibacy to being monastic. It's a small shift that happened at the 10th century. So that's the reason mainly why this happened. And there has been actually nowadays in the Orthodox Church a debate also that whether these were, 7th century was 7th century, it's a different time. But maybe now we can, with modern, democratic, different systems, can we re-establish a married priest, married bishop concept? It's of course a very novel idea and with prudence approached. But still the discussions are, and there are even proposed that how can it happen? How can we have married bishops or at least allowed in some cases, because specifically when we look at the Nordic regions, we see that we have difficulties finding candidates who are, especially from Estonia, to live in celibacy or from a monastic background. So you have a problem of getting bishops if you don't have people who want to live in celibacy. So it is also a challenge from a modern world, I suppose, also to the Orthodox Church.
Bishop Marko, you sit now between two older brothers of tradition, and they have priests only male. But you, on some basis, you have decided that only also female can be priests. On what basis you have done that decision as Lutherans?
Okay, thank you. It's a very good question, although I was expecting something about marriage. But most of the Lutheran churches in the worldwide Lutheran community ordain women as priests nowadays. There is a small minority of Lutheran churches who do not, and who claim to be faithful to the tradition and still maintain only male priests. But as I said, most Lutheran churches ordain also women. And I would say the basic understanding behind that is that if the main role of priest is to preach the gospel of the Lord and administer sacraments, then it has nothing to do with your gender. So women can be as good priests as men, because the overall context has been changed. The times when women were not allowed to be active in politics on a public life are over. Women are as well educated as men, or even perhaps better. And if they met another qualifications for priesthood, they can be ordained. So there are also in my church a small minority of priests and lay people also who would oppose that. But this opposition mostly perhaps means that I can choose perhaps to the funeral of my mother to invite a male priest or something like that, but it's not really something which causes conflicts in a broader sense. In Estonia, actually, we ordained the first female priest already in the year 1968. So it's quite a long tradition, and nowadays approximately 1/3 of our clergy are women.
Now I'm tempted to say priesthood of all genders, but then I realize it's kind of complicated in our times. Bishop Jourdan, how can Pope be empowered to speak ex cathedra?
Thank you. So I escaped the question about female priest, no? About women priest. So it's good. It's good. It's over. And let's go on with the Pope. So yeah.
I could have answered that as well, so perhaps I could mix the questions.
No,
Sorry.
It's no, we cannot speak about everything, but well. So now about the Pope. First of all, let's say that it's not that everything what the Pope, of course, is saying is binding. Well, the bishop, as we understand it, is each bishop in his diocese, or is like let's say the symbol of the unity of the church and of the doctrine of the church, also the teaching of the church. But one of the bishops, in that sense, is a little bit different, because it's of course the way in which we as Catholic we understand that those words of our Lord Jesus Christ, that Christ gave, it was a gift to his church, the fact that he said to Peter that he would be like the rock on which he will build, Christ will build his church. So we understand it as a gift to the church, not as a gift to Peter as a person. And on that sense, there is a continuous tradition, at least in the Western Church, of the fact that when the Pope is speaking as a Pope, let's say on theology and on moral matters, his teaching will not depart from the teaching of Christ. A kind of, let's say, security given by the Lord to his people. Of course, it's the Pope will say many things. Not everything is ex cathedra. Ex cathedra means exactly that. Speaking, when the Pope speaks as Pope, he can speak also about theology and moral, but without doing it ex cathedra. For instance, the Pope Benedictus XVI, the one before Pope Francis, wrote a very interesting book, well, 3 books actually, about Jesus of Nazareth, where he summarized a little bit all the years and years of investigation about the figure of Jesus Christ. And he says at the beginning that I'm not at that moment speaking, I will not speak as a Pope, ex cathedra, but it's only I will speak as a private doctor. I will speak, how to say, with my experience of tens and tens of years of being a theologian, of being a professor. So in that sense, it's not that everything is binding, but we believe as Catholics, we interpretate some words of Christ in the Gospel of Matthew, in that sense that the Lord gives to his church a special charisma, let's say, in order to stay faithful to the teaching of Christ. So I know that not every Christian, not all the Christians agree with that, but it's the main reason why we have a Pope, because the Pope is not mainly the head of the church. The Pope in the church is just the guarantee of unity of the church and of the teaching of the church.
Our time is running very fast, so I have only one question what I can ask Tauri. And maybe I come from Marko, because Marko, you said that there is open door for dialoguing between Baptist and Protestant churches in Europe. But Tauri, there was a great holy council of Orthodox Church 8 years ago, and it also recognized that there could be churches outside of the Orthodox Church. And I just tried to find the right vocabulation here. It says that the Orthodox Church is open to dialogue with those churches which preserve the apostolic succession, the true faith, and the grace of the sacraments. And so my question is, does that verbalization close its door do any dialogue with us as Baptists, for instance?
Yeah, about the Holy and Great Council, I think there were different movements inside also, more some maybe more conservative ones who indeed did not, want to accept any name church given to any other denomination except the Orthodox Church. There were, of course, other movements that demanded that no, we should still use, so that's why the wording came as it came. As you well know, there are amongst Orthodox also some who do not even want to pray with other denominations, and they're presented also here in Estonia. So, and we're not talking about one church or Eucharist. Even praying is forbidden. So there are very strong conservative movements, very strict movements, and then there are other movements that are more open to dialogue. And I think that the phrasing that came was kind of in between these two movements, and they found some kind of a common ground to put there as a document. I know that it was a very heated debate there, and they had difficulties finding a common ground there, the Orthodox amongst themselves. You asked about the free churches in general. I think the Orthodox, when we look about the official dialogues that we have with different denominations and churches, then usually these dialogues have the aim to have communion with them one day. So to be one church. This is the ideal, maybe romanticized, but still an ideal that we have. So usually the Orthodox Church is in official dialogue with these churches that we truly believe that we can make it work, as they say in couples or marriages, that we can make it work. We can make something, even though we have departed, etc. But there's common ground here that in time, maybe in centuries, we can still grow together and come together. And in the Orthodox dialogue, I think it's important that the theological, the doctrinal, and the teaching and ecclesiology, it has to be on some common ground. We can't just live and say, okay, abstractly we're one, right? But details differ so much that it's in reality difficult to be one. So usually it is not only the priesthood question here or the apostolic succession. It is also the matter, and I suppose that these questions are the matter that we consider the most important, that okay, if we have these already close enough, then we can talk, right? There's somewhere to go. In other cases, we would say the differences are currently so big that we do not foresee any, perspective of becoming one church with you. And that's why we don't have actually official dialogue groups between, let's say, different like Methodist or even Baptist or Adventist or different these churches. And that's why it's mainly with more traditional churches, amongst them also the Lutheran church, that we can find some common ground. But this does not mean that we don't dialogue on different levels with also the free churches and share understandings there. I think the Estonian Council of Churches is a good example where the Theological Committee, where different denominations and also free churches are working together with Catholics and Orthodox and finding some common ground and common ideas. So I think, yeah, that's the main idea. And there actually priesthood is just one question there. But the last question maybe is also that the free churches themselves don't have such a fixed doctrinal that would be valid to everybody. So it's more fluid. And from the Orthodox perspective, there's an understanding that, okay, we come together, we have this common document, you sign it, we sign it, and then we come and meet with the next group and say, no, we don't agree with that, and it's a problem. So and it depends on the commission or the committee that is there and their theological perspectives. And I think that this fluidity is just too big to really, understand what is the final answer to the detailed questions. Some questions there still is. Just an example, even with the Catholic Church in dialogue, there was this. I don't remember which dialogue group was it, but there was signed a document where it was said that the local bishop and the local church is the true and full church of Christ. And the local church was strongly emphasized, and Cardinal Kasper was there also. And the Orthodox and Catholics were, yay, we had a common agreement and signed. And then this document went back to Vatican and said, whoa, there's a universal church also here. So, and we see even there the committee was influenced by the theological views of the ones who were there. That was not in total accordance maybe with the general views that existed also. So even in these levels we may have fluidity in some cases.
Yeah. Good. Let's now go to our tables, and we have only 5 minutes. But try to verbalize at least one question as a table. And we'll see how many we can take. But talk to each other, reflect what was said, and maybe you have... Okay, I'm sorry, time is short even at your table. But still, maybe there is a question from a table. Yeah, go ahead.
We have one. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. We asked something like this, and this goes to the Catholic tradition. I believe we heard that you spoke about common priesthood and ministerial priesthood. And the question is the personal relationship with God different with common priesthood and ministerial priesthood? Does it make sense? Do you understand?
Yeah, it makes sense. It's not an easy question, but first of all, I think that what is pretty clear, and I think that in all our traditions, is that let's say what we as Catholics we call the ministerial priesthood is it's a service. It's a kind of service to all the other people who have let's say, who are baptized. And in that sense, it's not, the priest is not a mediator between God and man, but he's serving Jesus Christ, who is the mediator between God and man. And then, I believe also that all people who have the common priesthood are called to belong to God and to unite to God, what we call holiness. And St. Paul said to the Ephesians that God has chose us before the creation of the world to be holy and immaculate in love in front of God. So it's to be a priest as such. Also, it's not a sign of holiness. It should be, but it's not always like that. Our goal is not to be. We are called to be priests, and to have also. We are called lay people as well as priests. We are called to exercise our priesthood, common or ministerial priesthood. But the goal of all of that is holiness, means to be one with God in all the cases. And the priest is not like the one who makes anybody holy, but just he might help each one to go to God and to look for this holiness. And then I just wanted to say something about the topic of priesthood, that many years ago, once just after coming to Estonia, I met with Thomas Paul, who is a very well-known Lutheran theologian, an old man now. And the first thing he asked to me was, "But what is for you the what is our Lutheran service and our Eucharist or communion in the Lutheran Church from the point of view of the Catholic Church?" To say the truth, my Estonian at that time was not sufficient to answer very quickly to that question, and I was still processing all that thing. And Thomas Paul said to me, but anyway, I understand that the problem is not with the Eucharist. The question is the priesthood, no? And I said yes. I was able to say yes in Estonian at that time, so I said yes. And for that reason, I think that, of course, the priesthood, for us, it's a sacrament it's not the only thing, but I think it's something where we all Christians we should try to have a real dialogue, because it's also a key for many things. What is really priesthood, and what is similar in our different approaches to the priesthood, and what is different, because I think that any way, any path toward unity of the Christians has to go through this question of the way in which all the believers or some among them can participate in the priesthood of Christ. So just I remember now those words of Thomas Paul, and I think that since I never forgot those words, because I think it's a point, it's a key. It's not the most important thing, but certainly it's a key for me.
Tauri wants to add. Maybe Marko, you can give the mic.
Yeah, just from an historical point of view, in the church history, we have had times where the bishop or priest is more closer to God than the layperson, and the fundamental text that was very important in medieval Western Europe as well as in East for some time, but which has been re-evaluated in time, of course, is the Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite and his famous work, The Ecclesiastical Hierarchy and Celestial Hierarchy. So both of these works, in a very new Platonic form, actually made us a different level hierarchy of heaven and earth. And there we can see how the bishop is actually closer to God, and from bishop the divine would move downwards, and then the layperson would get it as a final diluted form in a way. So these ideas existed, but as the work itself is rather mystical, it has been also argued like, what does it really mean that, or is it more of a symbolical hierarchy, just to more show a monastic way of developmental elements of how can we approach God better? So this work has been under a lot of different interpretations, but just to be clear, these tendencies existed where one was more closer or had a more direct link with God than the other. But I think in general, these have been some voices, but it has been in large re-evaluated. And I know that Dionysius Areopagite's works, this aspect is very thoroughly criticized both by the Catholic and Orthodox theologians and clergy also.
That can be found where? That language?
The what? You mean the work of Pseudo-Dionysius Areopagite? It's a work from the 6th century. Many works actually under his name. So you can read them there, and it's an interesting reading anyhow, but a very influential one. So this brought in, and it was translated to Latin also quite early, and it was a very famous work in medieval West also.
Okay. Yes, question there.
Yes, thank you for a very interesting panel discussion so far. We were talking a little bit about the roles the difference of role between the laity and the clergy. And for example, for the Lutherans, that the clergy's role to proclaim the teaching of Christ and administer the sacraments, if it's a utilitarian thing, or an essential thing, that it's the clergy, not the laity. Like, for example, there are cases where the laity are baptizing, for example, infants who are dying. But this authority to do that, is it a utilitarian thing that it's better, generally speaking, if it's the clergy who administers the sacraments, or is it something that comes back to a special calling?
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure if either of those words, utilitarian or essential, is a good concept of describing it, but they are not ontological or essential in a sense that the personhood of ordained pastor wouldn't change according to our understanding. The authority is given by the church in the name of Christ in order to serve God's people. And of course, there are, yes, you're right, there are exceptions. There is an emergency baptism, which can be done by lay person. And there are also emergency occasions where Holy Supper can be consecrated and distributed. So they are people who have got the call from God, who have got a sufficient theological preparation, good qualifications as believers, and who are given by the church in the name of Christ certain roles, certain authorities, certain duties to serve the whole people of God. Not in the sense that priesthood are somehow better or closer or more qualified or something like this.
Okay. I think we can do one more question. So, and coffee break is coming, and I know Bishop Philippe needs to run away, but these guys, keep them and talk to them.
So we were discussing in here about how can Orthodox Church, or even with a Catholic Church, to have any open dialogue with a church who is ordaining as a women as a priesthood.
Well, in fact, there is a dialogue, no? Because we from the side of the Catholic Church, it's the fact of ordaining women, even if for us, of course, it's there is a theological question behind, but as such, as far as I know, it has never changed, let's say, lessened the fact of having a dialogue. I think the dialogue, if we need to be to agree almost on everything before beginning to dialogue, it's there is very few hope. So I think that the dialogue is also in the case where there are differences, where we are not we don't agree among ourselves, but I think that the dialogue as such is always possible and is real. I understand that in the Catholic Church we don't have women priests, and even the Pope John Paul II say that it's a definitive teaching. But the fact of being definitive, even if something is definitive, doesn't mean that we cannot dialogue. And I think that the ecumenism of love is the first one, and after that, the ecumenism of faith comes after. And then that's true that also from our point of view, even if the question of the priesthood, of ministerial priesthood for female is quite clear, but the church is doing all what is possible so that women could have the place that they deserve in the life of the church. And very lately, in October, the Pope Francis stressed it a lot. We had a synod in Rome with a lot of people speaking during 1 month about that and about also what women could do in the church. And I think that many things, many positions have changed, and let's say perhaps a certain machism, being a macho, let's say, which come from the past, now has changed very, very much. So I think that we are finding new ways also, so that the women could participate also in the government of the church, because not everything in the government of the church is directly related to the sacrament of priesthood. It's pretty clear. When we spoke about what I said, the munus regendi, the task of governing, there are many, many things in the life of the church which have nothing to do with the sacramental aspect. There is no reason to consider that the women could not have an active part there.
Yeah, I think the same in large is valid also in the Orthodox Church. We are in dialogue with churches that have female ordinations all way to being a bishop, Anglicans, Lutherans, etc. And I think currently the dialogue has arrived to a point where both state their differences and different understandings on this level. But there's a but, which means that the dialogue itself actually has initiated a self-re-evaluation inside the Orthodox theological community. And I don't know how much are you aware of it, but we have a very thorough and actually active debate on Orthodox female clergy. And there's a deaconate, like the diaconisses, or which is already a new issue, and there's a lot of debate, has been a debate how to revive or let's say bring back female deacons in the Orthodox Church. There's a debate, what did being a deacon, female deacon, mean in antiquity or late antiquity, in late antiquity church, whether it was the same priest, ordained priest, as it was with male virgins, etc. All these discussions are there. But lately, I think it was last year, we had our first Orthodox female deacon in Africa who was ordained according to the typicon that we use for male deacons. So this was first time now, 21st century, we have a female ordained deacon. It was under the Alexandrian Patriarchate. It created a scandal in a way, but it's still there, and we're still trying to understand how it will move on. A lot of great Orthodox theologians have reassessed our past. There have been discussions whether it is a historical element that we don't have female priests and bishops, or is it a theological, spiritual element that theology says that you cannot. There are discussions, yes, because the bishop represents, as we said, the icon of Christ, etc. So it has to be Christ was male, but anyways, there was no men and women in Christ, etc. So all these discussions are really, really big. But even a famous Orthodox theologian who has now passed away, Kallistos Ware from England, right? He even said that he was against it, and then he started researching the thing, and finally he also admitted that, okay, I think he changed his mind after that. So famous metropolitan and theologian of the Orthodox Church. So it is an ongoing debate with quite interesting developments inside the Orthodox Church. So I think the dialogue has initiated some elements, but in the main line, official answer still is, of course, no.
Thank you so much. It has been wonderful. Let's thank our guests.